The Supreme Admiral of the Galactic Hegemony sneered down at the frail, human child strapped to the examination table. A single human left in the entire universe? He laughed. You expect me to believe this little creature is the last remnant of your species? Then, the lights flickered. The walls groaned as if something massive was pressing against them from the void. The ship's AI screamed static before dissolving into mindless, incomprehensible whispers. The child slowly turned his head toward the Admiral, his unblinking eyes black as the abyss. You should not have taken me. The Admiral's blood turned to ice. Then, the dying started. Darkness stretched across the bridge of Citadel Prime, the seat of the Galactic Hegemony's military might. 100,000 battleships orbited the fortress station, their cannons pointed outward in a show of force that had cowed countless civilizations before. At the center of it all, Supreme Admiral Zyros stood before a containment chamber, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction. Inside, strapped to an examination chair, sat a human boy, 8 years old, weak, frail, staring blankly at the floor. Pathetic, Zyros sneered, pacing before the chamber. Is this truly all that remains of humanity? A fragile thing of meat and bone? The scientists around him worked feverishly, their instruments scanning the child, feeding raw data into the central AI. Readings displayed no anomalies, normal vital signs, standard human brainwave activity. No implants, no psionic potential, nothing to explain how humanity had vanished. Zyros leaned in, his 3 black eyes narrowing. Where are the others? The boy did not answer. The Admiral's clawed hand slammed against the containment glass. We found your escape pod, drifting beyond the bleeding edge. You did not survive alone. Tell me, where is the rest of your species? Still silence. Zyros bared his fangs in frustration. Break his mind, he growled to the chief researcher. Peel his memories apart cell by cell if you must. I want answers. The scientist hesitated. Supreme Admiral, the results are odd. Zyros turned sharply. Elaborate. The scientist gestured at the readings. Every scan confirms this is a normal human child. But something is off. His neural activity isn't fluctuating. It's static. Frozen. A chill crept through the Admiral's carapace. Explain. The scientist gulped. It's as if his mind isn't moving forward in time. Zyros scoffed. Superstition. He turned back to the boy, tilting his head. Your people thought they could hide from us. But we found you. We own you now. And before this cycle ends, I will know what happened to the rest of your kind. Slowly, deliberately, the boy lifted his gaze. His eyes were dark, fathomless, too empty for a child. You shouldn't have taken me, he whispered. Zyros recoiled, mandibles clicking involuntarily. The lights flickered. The station AI emitted a burst of garbled static before stabilizing. Zyros regained his composure, waving a dismissive claw. Enough of this. Initiate the deep probe. I want everything extracted from his mind. The moment the neural probe activated, the chamber shattered. Not physically, the glass remained intact, but every screen, every monitor, every piece of data in the room collapsed into unreadable noise. The station AI shrieked, filling the airwaves with a single, distorted word. Run! The chief scientist screamed, clutching his head, eyes bulging in horror. His mouth opened, stretched wide, as if something inside him was clawing its way out. Then, without warning, he crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Panic surged through the command bridge. Officers scrambled. Zyros grabbed a comlink. Security! The prisoner is... The words died in his throat. The boy was standing outside the chamber. The restraints had never been undone. The containment field had never been deactivated. But he was standing there, watching. One of the security officers, a hardened warrior with decades of battle experience, raised his plasma rifle. His hands were shaking. Stay where you are, the officer warned. Stay where? The boy blinked. The officer pulled the trigger on himself. A bright plasma bolt tore through his skull, splattering glowing ichor across the control panels. Chaos erupted. More guards fired, but their weapons malfunctioned mid-shot, melting in their hands. Others turned, screaming, shooting at something unseen, something only they could perceive. Zyro's claws trembled. "Seal the chamber!" he barked. "Now!" An emergency force field snapped into place around the control center, separating them from the boy. He did not move. Did not speak. Did not breathe. But the whispers began. They crawled through the station's comm systems, through every screen, every intercom, even through the very air itself. A voice spoke in 1,000 different human dialects at once. "You took me. Now you will understand." Zyros gritted his mandibles, eyes darting to the display panels. The fleet outside was turning against itself. Warships, the pride of the hegemony's navy, were firing on one another. "Impossible!" Zyros roared, slamming his fist on the console. He opened a direct link to the fleet command. "Admiral Threx, what is happening out there?" Only ragged breathing answered him. Then a whisper. "He's inside." The transmission cut to static. The control bridge shook as something massive exploded outside. A dreadnought, a vessel large enough to flatten a planet, erupted into a blinding ball of fire as its reactor overloaded spontaneously. Zyros spun toward the force field. The boy still stood there, utterly still. Watching. A low, rumbling laughter echoed through the station. Not from the child's mouth, but from every single speaker, every console, every synthetic interface. It was human. Zyros took a step back, his armored exoskeleton clicking in dread. "What are you?" The boy finally smiled. Not a child's smile. Not innocent. Not warm. It was knowing. "You took the last human," he whispered. "Now we take everything." The station AI shut down completely. Every emergency light turned blood red. Every escape route vanished from the navigational charts. And then, the doors opened. Not inward. Not outward. They opened into nothing. A black void, deeper than the fabric of space itself, spilled into the command bridge like a living shadow. The screams of the officers were cut short as they were pulled into the abyss, vanishing before they could even realize they were gone. Zyros staggered back, watching his empire crumble before his very eyes. The last thing he saw was the boy, stepping forward, untouched by the chaos, staring at him with those empty, endless eyes. "Don't worry," the boy whispered. "You won't be alone for long." Then the darkness swallowed him whole. The halls of Citadel Prime echoed with alarms. Soldiers moved in formation, their weapons primed, their eyes scanning every shadow. Something was wrong. Their scanners told them the human child was still in containment, but the bodies in the corridors told another story. Commander Adrian Voss moved like a ghost through the ventilation shafts, his breathing slow, calculated. He'd slipped past planetary defenses before, dismantled entire war fleets from within, but this was different. The hegemony wasn't fighting a war anymore. They were trying to survive something they didn't understand. He crouched at an air vent, scanning the corridor below. Four hegemony enforcers patrolled near a checkpoint, their reptilian eyes darting nervously. Their weapons were drawn, fingers twitching over the triggers. One of them muttered, "We should abandon the station. This is cursed." "Silence," barked the squad leader. "That child is still here. We end him, and this madness stops." A soldier shifted uneasily. "But we already killed him." "Twice." Voss exhaled slowly. That was new. He dropped down, landing silently. The guards had no chance. A knife slid through the nearest one's throat before he could even gasp. Voss moved like a phantom, snapping a second soldier's spine with a quick, brutal twist. The remaining two turned, their weapons barely rising before he fired, one shot to each skull. 4 kills in under 3 seconds. He grabbed a plasma rifle from one of the corpses and muttered, "They're scared." "Good." Moving swiftly, he reached the security control room. The monitors flickered, something was corrupting the system. Footage looped chaotically, a corridor empty one moment, full of corpses the next. Entire squads vanished between frames. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Then, a live feed caught his attention. Containment Bay Theta 7. The kid. Voss leaned in, eyes narrowing. The boy wasn't moving, but something about the image was off. He wasn't alone. A hegemony warlord, fully armored, stood frozen across from the child, weapon in hand. The warlord wasn't moving. Wasn't breathing. Then, the lights flickered. The warlord dropped to his knees, fingers clawing at his skull. His mandibles snapped shut involuntarily, cracking his own teeth as his body convulsed violently. A silent scream stretched across his face before he stopped. The warlord turned his own plasma rifle to his head. The feed cut to static. Voss clenched his jaw. The hell is going on here? The door behind him slid open. A hegemony officer, panting, wide-eyed, stood in the doorway, weapon shaking in his grip. He didn't fire. He didn't move. He just stared past Voss, his entire body trembling. Voss turned. The boy was standing behind him. A cold wave of dread crawled up Voss's spine. His weapons felt useless in his grip. Every instinct screamed to run, to not look into those eyes. Ethan tilted his head, watching him. Then, softly, he spoke. You came for me. Voss's voice was rough. You let them take you? Ethan blinked, his expression unreadable. They wanted a human. He took a slow step forward. So I let them have one. The officer collapsed to his knees, whimpering. Voss didn't even see Ethan move, but suddenly the kid was beside him, resting a small hand on the officer's head. Go to sleep now, Ethan whispered. The officer stopped breathing. Voss tensed, his grip tightening on his rifle. I need answers, kid. What the hell are you? Ethan's gaze lifted to him. Human. Voss's blood chilled. You're lying. The alarms blared again. Security lockdown initiated. Every remaining hegemony soldier on the station was now hunting them. Ethan turned toward the monitors. We should go. Voss grabbed his arm. Not until you tell me what's happening. I came here to get you out, not walk into whatever nightmare you've unleashed. The child smiled faintly. You think this is me? Ethan asked. The lights cut out. A voice, not over the speakers, not from the air, but inside Voss's own head, whispered. We are awake. Voss raised his weapon instinctively. A pulse of static rippled through the station, sending sparks cascading from the control panels. The floor beneath them shuddered. Outside the station, hegemony warships opened fire on one another. Voss's radio crackled. A desperate, panicked voice screamed through the comms. This is Admiral Threx. We've lost control of the fleet. Our own ships, they're firing on us. The AI, it's... Silence. Voss and Ethan stood still, the only sound the hum of failing machinery. Voss exhaled. All right, kid. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. You just moved from liability to high-value asset. Let's get the hell out of here before whatever you started finishes us too. Ethan blinked up at him. We're not leaving yet. Voss frowned. And why the hell not? The boy smiled again, soft, knowing, utterly wrong. Because they haven't suffered enough. The doors behind them opened into nothing. The air in the central control room of Citadel Prime felt thick, heavy with static. Voss gripped the rifle tighter, the silence pressing against his chest as he and Ethan moved deeper into the station. The child was leading now, stepping lightly, his pace measured. Each footstep seemed to vibrate with an unnatural rhythm. Voss's instincts screamed that something was wrong. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. They reached the main observation deck, the heart of the hegemony's operations. The massive windows revealed the black void of space beyond, the lights of distant stars flickering like broken candles. The hegemony's fleet, once a symbol of invincibility, now floated in chaotic disarray, like a dead constellation. Voss's fingers twitched around the rifle's grip, but he didn't raise it. The child had been silent for too long. The unease gnawed at him. What did you do? Ethan paused, looking at the darkened fleet outside, his face expressionless. I did what was necessary. What do you mean? Voss pressed. You're just a kid. Ethan's lips parted, and for a moment, the vast emptiness between them seemed to stretch. His voice, when it came, was far too calm. They took us all. You think this is what I wanted? Voss's jaw clenched. You think this is what I wanted? His voice cracked with frustration. I came here to save you. To stop this. Stop the war. Ethan's gaze lifted to meet his, the cold, depthless eyes locking onto Voss's. You should never have tried to save me. I never needed saving. Voss recoiled, his heart suddenly thudding hard in his chest. What the hell does that mean? The lights flickered, then died entirely. A hum filled the silence, a low-frequency pulse that rattled the walls and reverberated through Voss's bones. Ethan took a step forward, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The last humans are no longer human, Commander, Ethan whispered, his voice reverberating as if it were coming from everywhere. We ascended. What you see, what you thought was weak, fragile, it was the beginning of something far worse for your kind. The control room door slammed shut behind them with a violent clang, and suddenly, the station felt alive. The walls pulsed, the air thickened. The temperature dropped sharply, but it wasn't cold, it was unnerving. Voss stepped backward, his finger grazing the trigger of his weapon. What are you talking about? This is madness. You're just a child. A weapon isn't a child. Ethan's lips curled into a thin smile, the first expression he'd shown in what felt like forever. I'm not a weapon, Commander. But I can be one if I need to be. Voss swung his rifle up, aiming it at the boy, but his hands were shaking. Every instinct was telling him to pull the trigger. The boy was dangerous. Yet something held him back. You think you're the first? Ethan continued, his voice cool and detached. You think you're the first who tried to control humanity? To break us? No. We were always stronger than you thought. Always waiting. The pulse intensified, vibrating the very air around them. The control panels blinked to life, only to flicker and die again, revealing distorted faces, humans, warriors, scientists, leaders, from all walks of history, staring back at them. But their expressions weren't human. The faces twisted into something dark, their eyes vacant, yet alive with something otherworldly, something ancient. Their mouths moved, but no words came out, only the eerie hum of incomprehensible thought. Ethan stepped closer to Voss, and the ground shuddered beneath them. We are the legacy of humanity, Commander. You think we couldn't evolve? But we chose not to. We allowed you to believe we were extinct. You never saw it coming. Suddenly Voss understood. The hegemony hadn't killed humanity. They hadn't conquered them. Humanity had disappeared on their own terms. They had ascended, left behind the need for physical form, and now they were everywhere. In the walls, in the machines, in the very air itself. The faces on the screens twisted into incomprehensible screams, their bodies distorting, as if trying to break free of the void they were trapped in. The station trembled. Voss could hear the grinding of metal beneath him. Stop it! Voss shouted. This isn't you! Stop this madness! Ethan's expression softened, just for a moment. It's not madness. It's necessary. A low growl vibrated through the air as the walls cracked, the control center itself beginning to fold in on itself, warping under the immense pressure of the unseen force. The station was collapsing, or was it rebuilding? Why? Voss demanded, his voice hoarse with fear. Why are you doing this? What have you become? Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, as if sharing a secret. What have you become? You destroyed us, burned our cities, wiped out everything we were. But it wasn't enough. So we became nothing. Nothing you can fight. Nothing you can stop. The screens flickered again, and this time, the entire fleet of the hegemony appeared in flashes, battleships and cruisers burning, their hulls torn apart from the inside out, their crews screaming in silent agony. The fleets of the hegemony were tearing themselves apart, their weapons turning on themselves, their command centers collapsing into chaos. Your empire is finished, Ethan said softly, his voice blending with the sound of fading screams. You took us, Commander. You should have left us alone. Voss felt a cold sweat bead on his forehead as the realization hit him hard. He dropped his weapon, his mind struggling to grasp the reality of what he was witnessing. Ethan wasn't a child. He wasn't even human in the way Voss had understood. He had become something greater, something capable of decimating entire fleets with nothing but a thought. A sudden flash of light, a burst of psionic energy, washed over Voss, leaving him disoriented. When he regained his focus, the boy was gone. The station, the fleet, everything, vanished. And in its place, the voice of humanity echoed across the cosmos, speaking not with words, but with the pure essence of their legacy. We are not dead. We are eternal. Then, everything went silent. Voss felt the ground tremble beneath him as the last echo of Ethan's words faded into the void. Humanity is eternal. His breath caught in his throat. The walls, once sterile and cold, now seemed to pulse with a life of their own, vibrating as if the station itself was aware of his presence. The weight of it pressed on him, but what terrified him the most was the utter silence that followed. The warships, the hegemony's pride, were no longer moving. They had ceased to exist. He turned to look at the command console. The flickering lights from the dying systems seemed to mock him. His hand shook as he reached for the interface, desperate to make sense of what was happening, but the screens were dead. No signals. No data. Nothing. Just static. The floor trembled again, this time with a force that almost knocked him off his feet. He stumbled but quickly regained his balance. The boy. Ethan. He had to find him. Find the source of whatever was happening. Before he could make another move, the doors to the central chamber slammed open, revealing the vast, empty hallway beyond. Voss's instincts screamed at him to stay alert, but before he could react, the air around him shuddered as if an invisible force were pushing against him. Commander. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was not Ethan's voice, but it was his presence. The walls around Voss seemed to shift, almost alive, distorting and bending as if the very structure of the station were bending to its will. You thought you could stop this? The voice whispered, soft but carrying a weight of unimaginable power. You thought you could come in, disrupt what we've built, and walk out with your prize. Voss swallowed hard, his knuckles white as they gripped the rifle. Who's there? There was a sound, a whisper of air, and then the entire corridor before him erupted with sudden clarity. On the walls, in the space between the flickering lights, faces appeared, human faces, hundreds, thousands, their expressions haunting, warped with the same empty stare that Ethan had given him moments before. Their eyes were all fixed on him, and Voss could feel their gaze on the back of his neck, even though they were not physically present. Your kind tried to erase us. Kill us. Forget us. The voice deepened, darker, almost as if it were a collective mind speaking through every face, every shadow. But humanity was never meant to be erased. We were always waiting. The floor rumbled beneath Voss's feet again, this time with a sound that felt like it was shaking the station to its very core. The ships outside, the mighty war fleets, were still. The silence was now a tangible, suffocating thing. Stop this! Voss shouted, his voice breaking through the overwhelming pressure in the air. He aimed his rifle forward, but there was no target, no enemy. Everything felt wrong. You don't have to do this. We can fix this. We can. We never wanted fixing. The voice interrupted, cutting him off. It was calm now, almost detached. We were never broken. The universe is simply too small for us. Too fragile. The time for humanity to simply exist is over. Voss gritted his teeth, stepping forward with more conviction. His hand still gripped the rifle, but he knew now it was useless. This wasn't a fight of weapons. You're not human anymore, are you? He spoke to the faces, to the force pressing in on him. You've become something else. The silence thickened, and the faces on the walls flinched, their expressions flickering as if they were afraid. The air grew heavy again, and then, A low hum filled the room. "We are evolution," the voice declared, now with finality. "We've transcended your war. Your violence. Your need to control. You cannot stop what has already begun." The floor cracked, and the ceiling overhead split open with a deafening noise. The space around Voss seemed to collapse, twisting into impossible angles, the laws of physics bending and stretching, as if the station were folding inward on itself. He was falling, but there was no ground beneath him. The very fabric of reality was warping. The walls melted into shadows. Voss stumbled but found his footing. He had no idea how long he had been falling, only that he was no longer within the confines of Citadel Prime. He was in another place entirely, a vast, endless space, teeming with the whispers of voices, of humanity's essence, of an ancient power that had been waiting for this very moment. A force that was beyond comprehension. The whispers grew louder. Hundreds, thousands, millions of voices merged into one. "You cannot kill us," the voice rumbled from all directions, from everywhere. "You cannot even begin to understand the magnitude of what you've awakened." Voss's heart raced. He was no longer fighting an alien empire. He wasn't even fighting a single human child. He was fighting against the concept of existence itself, a force that had no physical form, that had never been meant to exist in the universe. He kneeled, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of it all. "I don't understand," he whispered. The voices paused. For a moment, everything was silent. Voss's chest tightened, his head pounding as the pressure of the unknown force surrounded him. He couldn't see it, couldn't touch it, but he could feel it in his bones. "You never did," the voice replied, softer now, almost sad. "You thought you were the apex of creation, the end of the line. But humanity was never meant to be finished. Not here. Not now." Suddenly, the pressure shifted, and the darkness that had been suffocating Voss ripped open. A single figure emerged from the shadows, the boy Ethan. He was no longer a child, no longer the frail thing Voss had thought he could protect. He was standing tall, his body radiating power, his eyes no longer empty, but full of a cosmic knowledge that Voss couldn't begin to comprehend. "You wanted to stop it," Ethan said, his voice now clear and certain. "But you were too late. We've already won." Voss stared at him, unable to move, unable to process the enormity of what he was seeing. This was no longer the child he had come to rescue. This was something beyond human. The universe around them cracked again. The fleet, what was left of it, dissolved into nothingness, scattered across the cosmos, like dust in the wind. Humanity had ascended. And Voss understood then what it truly meant. The last war had ended. Voss felt the station shake again, the walls and floors quaking as if they were made of paper. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to leave, to escape before whatever this thing was consumed everything. But he couldn't move. He couldn't look away from Ethan. No, not Ethan anymore, not a child, not anything recognizable. The boy, the entity, stood before him, radiating an energy that was unfathomable. The air around them hummed with a low, vibrating power, the very atmosphere seeming to warp under its influence. Ethan's eyes glowed with a light not of this world, and his voice, when it came, was nothing like the innocent child he had once been. "You thought you could stop it," Ethan's voice rumbled, deep and commanding. "You thought you were different, didn't you? That humans could somehow escape their fate." Voss shook his head, still reeling from the revelation. His gun was in his hand, but it was useless, the cold metal feeling like a relic from a past life. What are you? What have you become?" Ethan tilted his head slightly, a faint smile flickering on his lips. "What we were always meant to be. You never saw it, did you? The seeds of humanity, planted deep in time. We have always been destined for something greater. And now we've reached it." Voss stumbled back, trying to process the words. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered, his voice tight. "I came here to save you. To stop the hegemony. Not this." His grip tightened on his weapon, but the weight of it felt like nothing in his hands. He had no idea what he was holding anymore. Ethan's smile faded, replaced by something colder, more calculating. You never understood. We were never meant to be saved. We were always going to transcend. The hegemony wasn't the enemy. You were. All of you. Your war, your violence, your need to dominate, that was never the point. We let you think you could win, let you believe that you could control us. Ethan's voice grew quieter, more haunting. But we were always waiting. The ground beneath Vasa's feet cracked open, a strange glow emanating from the fissures. It was as though the very foundations of reality were splintering, breaking apart. Reality itself was bending to Ethan's will, or whatever he had become. Vas stumbled backward, his hands raised instinctively, as if to shield himself from the overwhelming presence that seemed to press in on him. "What do you want from me?" he shouted, the panic rising in his chest. "I don't want this. I just—" "You don't want anything." Ethan's words were final, cold. "You think you do, but you don't. You were never meant to fight us. Humanity wasn't meant to fight at all. You should have just let it happen. The end was inevitable." Vasa's pulse raced. He could feel the overwhelming weight of the situation crushing him. Everything was collapsing, not just the station, but the entire fabric of reality. The control systems were glitching, the walls warping, bending as if reality itself was losing its grip. "I won't let you. You already lost." Ethan cut him off, the words seeping into Vasa's mind like poison. "The hegemony was always too small to contain us. We were never meant to be ruled." Vas tightened his grip on his rifle and moved forward, his mind clouded with desperation. But before he could make another move, Ethan extended a hand, palm open, and the world shifted. Suddenly, Vas was no longer standing on solid ground. He was floating in space, surrounded by a vast, starry void. The station, the ships, the galaxy, everything was gone. A single figure stood before him now. Ethan, but not Ethan. His eyes were no longer human, glowing with an energy that made Vasa's mind reel. The boy was surrounded by a presence, an energy that was too vast, too complex, to comprehend. "You think you're special?" Ethan's voice, now devoid of emotion, echoed in the void. "You think you stand apart from everything else? That your existence has meaning?" Vasa's throat tightened. I don't understand. What do you want from me?" Ethan stepped forward, his form blurring as if he wasn't entirely in the same reality anymore. "I want you to understand what you've done. What we've become. Humanity is infinite. And now we are beyond your reach. We are the end of everything." Vas opened his mouth to speak, but the words died before he could form them. The weight of Ethan's words crushed him. He had always believed humanity to be a species of struggle, of survival, of fighting to the bitter end. But this was something other. Something that transcended everything. "You don't belong here," Ethan said softly, almost pityingly. "You were never meant to fight against us. We were the ones you should have feared, but you didn't. You thought your wars, your weapons, your petty struggles meant something. But you couldn't even begin to comprehend what we've become." Vas felt something shift in the air around him. The emptiness that surrounded them wasn't empty at all. It was filled with knowledge, an unfathomable force that twisted through his very being. His breath quickened as he gripped his rifle again, instinctually, but this time it felt ridiculous. This weapon meant nothing. He meant nothing in this moment. "You're right," Vas said, voice low. "I don't understand. But I know one thing, you're wrong." Ethan's eyes flickered, almost as if he were surprised. "What? You can't just take everything." Vas stood a little straighter. "You don't control this." "Not yet." Ethan's smile returned, but it wasn't reassuring. It was more like a promise, a dangerous, final thing. "You think you can stop it? You think you can resist? There is no resistance here. There is no fight. There is only what we are. What we always were." Vas could feel it, the pull of everything rushing toward an end. He dropped the rifle. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed for what seemed like eternity, but the silence that followed was deafening. "You are nothing," Ethan whispered, his voice almost sad, yet final. But you are a part of this, whether you want to be or not. And then, there was nothing. The universe folded, stretched, and finally, the stars disappeared into an endless void. Humanity had won.